Hello, everyone. A big warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today from INSEAD. I'm really happy that you were able to be with us today to talk about digital transformation with a very successful use case at Henkel. And to be able to do this, I have my great colleague, Dr. Nick Miesen, who actually has left the organization since then. Now he's the Regional Director of Operational Excellence for Middle East and India at a Dutch company called Fugro. But he is, in that sense, a digital evangelist. So in terms of his responsibilities, his work, actually, he's pretty much continuing and spreading the word around the world in various different regions. Nick, thank you so much for actually making the time for us to actually come and talk to us, talk to our audience, and give us further details of this case.
My pleasure, Enver, and super nice to talk again, obviously, on the case, and greetings from India.
Thank you so much. So before I actually jump into the Henkel case, let me put a quick framework about digital transformation. Because again, the idea is that data is plentiful, technology, especially infrastructure technology, is there. So what we could do is we can put all these sensors all around our operations, collect a wealth of data, populate our dashboards, and we can actually support our decision-making processes. So you can see maps like this all over the place. But the truth of the matter is, a big chunk of the digital transformation initiatives or projects are actually either not delivering the promise that they had started the journey with, or are simply interrupted midway because of some disruptions or unanticipated issues. Now, I believe that the key reason for this is not the way we set things up. It's indeed we collect the data, we populate the dashboards, and then we make the decisions. This is true. This is the right flow, the correct flow, once the system is in place. But when it comes to designing the system, thinking about the digital transformation, one actually has to do this in the reverse order. One has to say, hold on, what are some of the business outcomes that I would like to achieve in my work environment? Is it really, am I working in an environment where quality is non-negotiable? Am I working in an environment where products have extremely short life cycles, and as a result, I should be extremely responsive? Supply reliability is of critical importance, and of course, cost is always one of the binding constraints that I have to worry about. And so the issue is that I think the right starting point here is, well, what are the desired outcomes that I would like to get out of this digital transformation project? And in fact, to basically say, well, which decisions then would be able to lead to better business outcomes? So the starting point really is at the front end, customer-facing side, if you wish, saying that what are the outcomes that are being desired, and what are the decisions that would indeed enable those outcomes? Then we're going to walk backwards and say, okay, well, what sort of information do I need to be able to support that decision-making process? What type of data? What level of aggregation, and what level of frequency with which the data has to be refreshed, reformatted. And once we are clear about those, then we go ahead and start collecting the physical data from the trenches, if you wish, from the operating environment. Of course, this is not a linear process, but the thinking is that it has to be mapped from the desired business outcomes, goes through the important decisions that one needs, then talk about the appropriate dashboard to give us the information that supports that decision-making process, and then get into the data collection process. And of course, as we said, once the design is in place, then of course, we do collect the data, feed them into the dashboard, and then support the decision-making process. And once again, this is not just a one-shot deal. As we learn, as we get more, I guess, fluent in this process, we have to go back and pretty much fine-tune the process to actually improve the efficiency of that decision-making process now that we have that digital infrastructure. So this is what academics talk about when they talk about digital transformation. But the good news is courageous people like Nick actually are in the trenches who actually go in and do this thing. So before I turn the floor over to Nick, let me say a few words about Henkel. This is a huge organization, more than 21 billion euros of sales on a global basis. At least from a manufacturing perspective, more than 120 sites around the globe, 48,000 people. So it is a big, big, big organization that we're going to be talking about today. And the organization has two probably equally weighted components to it. One is the consumer brands that probably, most of us are familiar with in terms of, detergents, hair coloring, etc. But today we're going to be talking about the industrial part of this organization, which actually focuses on the so-called adhesive technologies. And I'll say a few more words about that in a minute. Again, this is almost in terms of sales, half of the organization's results. Very impressive organic sales development. And in terms of the financial outcomes, actually, it's also quite impressive. Basically, this is something that we typically do not see in the products that we use because these are the technologies for adhesives, sealants, and functional coatings that make sure that the stuff that we buy and use are actually working properly. And in fact, it's a good thing that they're invisible because what that means is that they are indeed doing their jobs. So on a global basis, as you can see, they are pretty much all over the world, 124 production sites, over 100,000 customers, which means that on an annual basis, they're dealing with some 15 million order lines that they have to satisfy on a day-to-day basis. Now you're going to say, hold on, but at the end of the day, this is a chemical process. So what you do is you simply receive the ingredients, the chemicals, the stuff that you need, you store them, and then depending on the recipe that you're going to be producing, you're going to take the stuff, create, stage the kit, so to speak, and then the manufacturing process is nothing but mixing the right proportions of things and filling them in the right packaging formats, and then we can actually send it over to the customer. So how complex could this be? Well, the truth of the matter is it can be quite complex because this side of Henkel is actually serving a variety of quite distinct industrial, channels, which has quite drastically different requirements as well. For example, when we talk about mobility, when we talk about electronics, we're talking about automotive, we're talking about aerospace, we're talking about, mobile devices. And here, quality is a must, it's non-negotiable, but not only that, given the very short life cycles of the products, you have to actually deliver the same level of performance day in, day out, regardless of these fast-changing conditions. Then there is the industry that focuses on packaging and consumer goods. Here, we're talking about, fast-moving consumer goods, and when you look at, I don't know, a box of detergent or others, the packaging is actually a very small percentage of the cost of goods sold, but if you don't have it in the right format, it's a showstopper. So supply reliability here is of utmost importance. And then ultimately you have the professionals, the craftsmen, the construction industry, etc. Here, again, cost is the driving issue. And when you look at these typical requirements, you realize that, yes, it starts with a simple chemical, but you have to be able to engineer this in so many different formats and provide the infrastructure, the supply chain, to be able to serve these industries in the same effective type of fashion. And this is really where the complexity comes in. And just to quickly tell you is that when we think about this, here are some of the base technologies. For example, surface treatment and cleaners, the STC here. But then when you look at STC underneath that, there is a whole new portfolio of different types of sub-technologies, chemistries, etc., that you have to deal with. So it's a very complex process. And in terms of complexity, I guess, I can, again, as an incorrigible academic, I can try to put this on a map and say, look, on the one side, I can actually talk about, well, in terms of, I guess, volume, in terms of, drums, kilograms, gallons, but this is only one dimension of the process, because when we think about the delivery requirements, we're thinking about, a single drum to a whole pallet load to a whole tanker load kind of a thing. But on the other side, when you look at these individual production sites, there is a huge level of complexity, and you can define complexity in several, not necessarily mutually exclusive fashions. For example, you can say, well, what about the full-time equivalents working in a production site? What about the number of different technologies that a site is actually capable of, working with? And of course, what about the end industries and customers, number and type of those that each of those sites are responsible for? So I hope I was able to give you the background of this industry that basically says, well, it's chemistry at the end of the day, and it's only mixing a recipe. But then when you think about the end-to-end supply chain, really going from a few milliliters to a few tons, that requires huge levels of capability. And this is basically where Henkel said, okay, well, what we need is some digital transformation to be able to do things better. So at this point, I'm now ready to put Nick on the spot, and I can actually ask him to join us. And I guess the first question before going into his personal experience is to look at this from the organization's perspective. Nick, Henkel is a huge ship, big organization, huge footprint around the globe, 48,000 people. So I guess someone didn't wake up one morning and said, we have to go through digital transformation. So what were the drivers? Where did this idea of digital transformation come from?
Obviously, good point to start with. I think the key word in most of my answers will be value. Not the technology drive. Yes, there were leaders who obviously liked the new gadgets and the new sensors and all the new technology that's available. The push came really from a continuous improvement point of view, where you can lean out an organization so much until you need to make the next step change. We saw we were coming closer and closer to having difficulties making our yearly targets. So the drive was, how do we ramp up our digital program in order to make that next step around efficiencies? So that was the starting point in terms of the need and the value from the business.
So let me make this then a bit more personal, and let me actually ask a few more questions about your personal journey. And I think this will be useful for organizations looking into digital transformation, especially asking the question, what is the right profile for leading this type of an initiative? From your personal perspective, when top management came to you and said, Nick, would you like to spearhead this? What was what were the personal reasons for you to basically say, this is a challenge that I would like to take, I can actually deliver on this?
I think it's a combination. I mean, in the end, you need to be a change agent. You cannot be just a tech enthusiast. Yes, I am. I have a background in physics and aerospace engineering. Do not ask me to run one single tech project because I will fail. I love the bigger scheme of things. I love working on a strategy level. In the end, I'm a change agent. I love transformation. I love changing where we are today, reaching a vision for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So I think that's the key thing triggering who leads this. And I think this is for me an intrinsic part of who leads a digital transformation. It cannot be a tech-driven person. It could be a tech enthusiast, but I think the generalist mindset, the energy and the passion for change, the drive for transformation is I think more important. And I think that it doesn't only count for digital transformation, it can for numerous other transformations. I think the energy bringing into a company is I think the key part here.
So basically, what you're telling us is that if for those among us who are contemplating such a project,
stop, don't do it. No, just kidding.
The change agency is the big thing, and then now the tech enthusiast to make sure that's your fuel.
And I think the other one that comes to mind, and I think that's part of being a generalist, is connecting teams, connecting experts, connecting different functions. And this is specific to digital because it is breaking silos, and digital touches all different functions. And with that, you need to be an orchestrator. You need to be able to connect, build bridges. And of course, with digital, you cannot build bridges with everyone, and that takes time. But in general, a connector, an orchestrator is also really part of that profile.
That's neat. So let me kind of retrace your journey. I mean, literally, you arrive in Singapore, you put down your suitcases, move into your apartment. Now you have these some 120 facilities around the region, and I must emphasize, in Southeast Asia, there are no short distances. I mean, coming from Europe, especially Western Europe, where everything is so concentrated that everything is a 3-hour train ride away. Here, it's the shortest place is like 3-hour plane ride away kind of a thing, and we're looking at 7, 8, 9-hour plane rides as well. Your first 100 days, what are the initial challenges? Is it the technology? Is it the people? Is it learning the lay of the land? Where do you start?
Yeah, and it's really nice to go back memory lane. I think taking one step back, where it started is around governance, and where we all have to work with finite budgets. There is a need and a pull to deliver, I don't know what not, but there's always a finite budget. So I think the first step was around creating a common vision on what do we want to achieve, and obviously prioritize those needs and start on your roadmap. Back then, started off in Amsterdam in our operation and supply chain headquarters. It was a one-man show. It was a digital strategy that was delivered with the main cause of how do we deploy at scale? How can we create more transparency? Because with that data, we can bring those further efficiencies. That was the idea. That was the assignment, and that's a little bit how the strategy came about. Obviously, one guy cannot change the world, so we define a hub and spoke organization, a hub in Singapore because of the strong digital ecosystem that is there, the talent that is available, and then creating spokes in the four major regions, because still the dynamic in each region could be slightly different, especially the maturity would be different. I mean, going to Asia, where they are a little bit ahead of us in Europe, was also a reason why touching base in Singapore. Now, in the team, I mean, not to go into to each and every detail, but I think it consisted out of three main columns, which was the deployment and how do we create value from the systems, the data analytics once the data is there, and then the security bit, the OT security, the OT cybersecurity bit on how do we protect our sites so then we can operate in a safe environment. We have our systems deployed, and then how do we take the next step? How do we create value out of it? So first step was obviously blinking a couple of times, getting used to the heat in Singapore, starting to hire for those positions that weren't hired. We practically start from zero, and hired actually all talents that were in the hub were based in Singapore.
I see. So
So
your
I think that was especially the first big action. I mean, it starts with people, never with technology. It starts with people, getting the right people in, and organizing ourselves around the roadmap, which means on a yearly basis you evaluate the available budget, and that's how you start deploying.
I see. Now, coming back to the budget, so you have, I guess first order of business is getting the team in place. Now, the technology to be able to map this to the roadmap, in terms of choices, it is vast. So what kind of a go, no-go gauge, or what kind of an evaluation process did you use to be able to say, this technology is a must-have. This is nice to have. This one, yeah, it looks really, really sexy, but it's not going to deliver value for us.
Yeah.
What were the criteria that you were using, the templates you were using to be able to actually guide that decision-making process?
So it's with 120 sites, with so many different types of products, with so many different industry needs, because imagine semiconductor, super high quality needs. Your volumes could be 5 kilograms. I kid you not, it was 5 kilograms, all the way down to construction where you would produce in tons. and everything in between. So having a crystal clear framework is almost impossible, because it's practically infinite on all the possibilities, and therefore the needs. So where we start looking at on where does the value kick in? What's the available technology, and what's the value to be generated? So you could imagine, okay, we need data, and can we further automate? But in the end, it was, again, value coming from the business case discussion. How much can we actually generate through deploying a certain system? And yes, there are industry needs. So there were automotive that has super high critical needs. You shall do X, Y, Z, and we had to adhere to that, of course. Now, with the business cases, we had to realize budget is infinite, and I think that's the reason why we're getting paid to make choices. And we came up with an archetype approach, where a certain level of archetype, and if you see the complexity here, it's I'm not sure if the right slide is on here, because the top right, you see the bit on the left, the top
So
right.
You want to give this?
Okay. This is easy to share.
Please walk us through this.
So on the left side, you see our zoo of production site, and it could be, again, all over the place, high complexity, high volume, and the reverse. But to simplify the discussion and to understand roughly what a group of site would need, we start thinking in the archetypes discussion. And let me start with the two simple ones. Archetype 1, there is not enough complexity nor not enough value to have any refined system. So think on just basic systems would be deployed. It could be OEE around efficiency. It could be some energy measurements. Well, and that's about it, right? Then on the heavy side, we had high volume, high complexity, but then the connection to complexity is the industry. So the complexity around semiconductor, the complexity around automotive. So there's a willingness to pay, which means high volume, high complexity. We can make a business case running. So we could do more advanced tooling. We could do more advanced digital technologies of implementation. Now in archetype 2, this is a little bit where obviously on one hand it's a gray area. On the other hand, up for discussion, up for the appetite also of a site management or regional management to take this forward. So we could have the high volume, low complexity case, which is the bottom right, where the complexity wasn't enough. So think about bulk products, not enough margin. It would almost, the business case was quote unquote almost killed, that we couldn't make any business case happen. So in terms of heavy automation, so we stuck to archetype 2, and the same on the other hand, the high complexity on the top left would so that would come with high changeovers. So with the complexity of all the chemicals and the high number of changeovers, the business case could never allow many FTEs walking out of the door. We would always need people to support the changeover, which means we couldn't implement the heavy automation part. And that's how we distinguish between a digital system or a fully automated system, automated production line. So I think those were the choices we made in terms of the heavy deployment cost that came along with the needs of those archetypes.
I think this is really neat. I mean, translating it from a very high level digital roadmap, and then being able to map this to individual assets, individual production sites, taking into account their individual capabilities, their competencies, as well as their missions, to make sure that there is consistency across.
And then the value, and then again, I repeat myself, the value discussion is in the end core. What will you do with the system, right? It's great to have all sorts of digital technologies available, but what are you going to do with it? Is there value in it? And I think that revolves then on all the aspects you also refer to.
Now, let me ask a follow-up question on that. And please, if this borderlines confidentiality, feel free to say, no, I cannot go into that level of detail. But when we talk about value here, especially being able to build a business case, how do you measure it for these specific settings, these specific segments? Is it really that you can do just-in-time delivery, and as a result, you can charge a 2% premium? Is it really some sort of, say, higher levels of capacity utilization that reduces, I don't know, the contribution to overhead? Or how do you actually map, or how do you actually concretely measure value in financial terms?
I think a couple of things I can mention, and let me start with the end in mind. At one point, you're starting to capture use cases. So you can start referring to, hey, site ABC used a certain use case, may it be energy measurement or cycle time optimization, where you could think of reduction of your shift pattern. So at one point, you're gathering a catalog of certain use cases. So you saw over the years business cases becoming more refined, because it goes, hey, but that site, similar technology, made this and this improvement. If I now go all the way back to the beginning, there's also a degree of early adapters. There were you need your sponsors, you need your people say, I believe in digital. I know we're going to make it. I know we need the data, and it could be as simple as we will have 5% less losses because we have better control, better insight, and we're not scrapping. We reduce our scrap. We have less admin, which means also a reduction there. And sometimes it was literally 3 lines, but again, it was around what's the value, and that was a little bit in turn towards the receiving organization. We, as a central group, cannot be responsible for your P&L. So we're going to equip you, we're going to help you, but this was also the mechanism of, great, you're getting a digital tool, so leadership will look at you as an, all right, the year after, are you delivering value with it? So it created a I don't want to say it wasn't a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it created a certain pool. So gradually business cases became more refined and better. Exactly.
I see. One other thing actually that in our discussions as we were writing this case that I saw you doing, and I hadn't seen that before in other digital transformation applications, was that you had this app store model that, initially as part of this, consistent backbone, you had that uniform backbone or the framework, and then you created this app store so that different assets, different production sites with different needs, capabilities, etc.,
Yeah.
could go ahead and pick and choose the stuff that they need and plug and play. Can you say a few more words about that? I thought that was a really innovative approach here, which also ultimately
Yeah,
is going to move to the organizational side.
that was indeed a clear result of once you start moving towards use cases, which I think was my biggest lesson learned. I should have started off with that you create more tangible use cases, because then digital comes to life, and not every site will use every use case. So you can start creating certain apps in your MES system or apps in your data landscape, where as long as you do your homework, you're standardizing your flow, you have your master data up and running. So basically you're offering your data in your data lake or your central data platform. And on top of that, you can start plug and play with certain modules. May it be a maintenance module, may it be a cycle time module, may it be an OEE module. But that concept, obviously, especially in the world of digital, and again, still in development, but imagine how easy it is as in your iPhone. Hey, I have a better OEE tool or a better maintenance tool. I remove the old app and I install the other app. But that takes really a strong data management, data backbone. Eventually, we landed on unified namespace, UNS, which could help this. And I haven't seen it come to life, but conceptually, that is what it could offer. And indeed, then you get a catalog of apps based on the pool of the market, which were the 120 sites. Because gradually pool went higher, and again, resources are narrow. But once you have a proven app, you can make it available. And then we come obviously in the continuous improvement best practice sharing realm, where you can start building on each other.
I see, which actually segues nicely into the organizational side of the challenge. I guess this architecture, if I may call it that way, facilitated the transition from initial use case, a working prototype to scaling. And then you still have to convince people. You still have to, get the buy-in so that they don't just pay lip service, but they adopt and they live and die by it. How was that transition? How did you manage that? What were some of the challenges on that dimension? Because people are not algorithms at the end of the day. You have to convince them.
Yeah. I mean, then we come in the realm of priority setting, right? I mean, at one point, your digital program is coming to life, and then other functions are trying, well, hold on, you're spending your budget on these deployments of MES. I need that budget for XYZ. And I think that is and still is my biggest lesson learned. Well, that's priority setting that needs to happen on leadership level. One step back before that, I think the moving from your 20% early adapters into the 60% followers of your believers. Again, I come back to the use case lab. I think one major lesson learned that I would have done before is closing the loop of basically your data dashboard decision, having and not maybe one site, but a very finite number of sites where your data is completely correct, available in a central database, and maybe you have tested it with 2 or 3 use cases that where the result is visible in the P&L. Because up until that point, and actually I cannot disagree with it. It's only true when it's visible in the P&L. I remember Mark Dorn, our current EVP, always mentioned that, and it is true. And I think closing that loop instead of, hey, look at the data, now you can work with it. I think that assumption was the wrong one, because it doesn't mean that everyone knows what to do with data. And hence I come to the connection of operational excellence and continuous improvement. What do you do with that data? So I think rather than going for more deployments, I would have focused on a smaller number of sites, closing the loop, not only ending at data dashboard decisions, I don't know, a D for cash, I don't know, where the cash is measurable and seen in your P&L, because that's in the end the proof, right? And I think if you do it 2 or 3 times, the 60% will follow, and you have an easier discussion around priorities. Now, where it still clashes, and I think that is a challenge, where you could have industry needs, say quality knowing a automotive sites needs these ABC requirements versus sustainability versus logistics, and you name it. And at one point, your budget is gone. And I think that is, and that deserves also a very strong governance on leadership level to determine this.
I see. Now, I think you partially answered my next question, looking at the, I guess, mobilizing and maintaining the momentum on the organizational side. I was going to ask you, how do you measure progress and how do you celebrate success? So one point that you mentioned that this was during the project, how frequently did you look at the financial dashboard, so to speak? Was it every 3 months, every quarter, or was it, did you give yourself a bit more time every half year, a year? So how was progress measured, and these successes, these use cases, how did you make them visible? How did you celebrate them within the organization so as to, make the momentum even bigger?
Yeah. This is it's nice that you bring this up. This was one of the challenges on creating visibility around the tooling, where digital also enables a lot of things, and enablement doesn't directly show up maybe in a P&L. So I think the discussions around savings targets, that was a really difficult one. So
Mm.
how to distinguish one saving from the other, because obviously there's so many initiatives going on, and digital is an integral part of enabling so many other things. So the initial business case was relatively easy because that was the business case we signed off on to do the deployment, which is getting the archetype deployed, the MES system deployed. But then on the use cases, sometimes it was really, really difficult to distinguish this. And obviously, in the world of hard savings, soft savings, we were at a point of well, actually checking it every month. But it was a difficult discussion because measurements were upfront, not aligned. And I think that is what has been one of the issues that haunted us to prove our point on a lot of these use cases. No, not a lot, on a few of these use cases.
But I guess the organization was flexible enough to go back and revisit some of those targets with more learning, with more data. You were able to fine-tune at least the decision-making process, the evaluation process, so to speak, and measuring
Yeah,
progress.
and hence came the use case lab where we obviously selected just a few. We were focusing on them. One of them was focusing on energy measurement. I mean, at one point you want to do the basic one at
Of
scale.
course.
And I remember well that was one of the criteria, as in I want this use case to be used at 20 sites, 40 sites, because then you prove it works at scale. It's up to each site. I mean, this is the other part of it. It's also up to the site that if you identify a potential energy efficiency, say site ABC has its windows open, has that's an easy one, but has its compressor on over the weekend. They still have to
Hmm.
shut it down to create the value coming from digital. Now, so those things still is so the adoption and the skill. I think that's a fair one to look at.
To cascade it through the organization, for example, I'm the operator on the shop floor, I'm the foreman who's running the shift, etc. How much of a transition was it for them? And as a result, if it was a big transition, how much of an effort was put in to retrain them, to upskill them, to be able to take full advantage of, what's possible and how to, understand the data and use that data more efficiently in their decision-making process?
A very good question, and again, it revolves around people, right?
Hmm.
And this is not the willingness to change. This is also upskilling. So you have to actively, obviously, change and upskill your organization. A part of the business case, which was a mandatory topic, was not only the financial part, but also who is the key user. We need a person who owns the system, who will be part of the whole the whole deployment, and will be also the trainer of the trainer concept. So
Hmm.
there were numerous people. Gradually this community start building obviously around the world and creating their own community. But a key aspect was we need an owner on the floor. Also, this person helps obviously with where the process slightly differs, because then you need to adjust your deployment
Hmm.
slightly. But you needed an expert on the ground, and obviously rather more senior than you, junior, in terms of acceptance and in terms of train-the-trainer concept. But that was a mandatory part of the business case. So not the monetary value, but also who's going to own it, because a few people in the central team cannot run this on your behalf. You need
I
eyes and ears on the shop floor.
I see. That's now I want to look a bit into the future, but before then, let's quickly summarize the discussion so far in terms of your personal journey. Imagine that I'm tapped by my organization to lead a digital transformation initiative. What would be the three things that I must do, and what would be the three things that I must avoid at all costs? Three do's and three don'ts as I'm getting into this job.
Yeah. Let's tackle on the famous people, process, and technology. I think must do is indeed the type of people. So form a team of change agents, high energy, obviously smart. You need to understand your technology, but it needs to need to be orchestrators. It needs to be people who can connect, who can build a community. And I think that's that's one of the must-dos. If I look on the processes, it's around standardization, create a flow. Do not accept an unstandardized situation for your deployment, because it will be a failure. So we have an archetype 0 where we say, well, your processes are not standardized, we're not touching you. And again, prerequisite. So that's the process side. If I then look at technology, and I think that's, again, and I deliberately put this one last, is think on standardizing as much as possible, right? I mean, with 120 sites, so many different regions, legacy systems. I mean, in the end, you would say, yeah, I want one system. And that doesn't always fly. So we bend it to maximum 2 or 3 systems, but the more you standardize on your technology, the better it is, especially on your backend, right? I mean, in Asia, we were standardized on Siemens PLCs.
Mm-hmm.
That makes your life just a lot easier. But the choice was easy in APAC because we were building new sites. Europe,
Yes.
well, older sites, zoo of opportunity. Well, then sometimes you don't have that choice. But if you have the choice, standardize as much as possible.
And what are the 3 don'ts?
On the don'ts, let me see. I think do not move forward once you haven't aligned measurements of success, as I come back to, with all leadership agreeing. I think that's one. When I think about process, well, I come back to the same, do not deploy where it's not standardized. So I think that's the part there. Technology, do not forget also to keep on innovating. Innovating, you do need to close your eyes for always the business case. There are things you have to try out, right? The business case isn't always clear. So you have to answer the pull from certain sites, because at one point you get sites that are just a little bit more mature. They want to run, they want to have AI, they want to have different types of sensors. And do not forget to keep on innovating. And I think if you have that business case approach, obviously innovation is investing and not always having a clear return. Now in operation supply chain, so that was obviously the job of innovation, but within ops and supply chain, don't forget to keep on innovating.
Now, after this Herculean effort, do your kids still recognize you? Well, this was just a quick comic relief, because I remember that you spend more time on an airplane than back at home. That's...
if you would ever meet my wife, she would have killed me if I wouldn't be at home on regular basis. It did mean, a lot of balancing. I have to say I had a lot of flexibility around my work, when to work, because if you have a global role in Singapore, it also means evenings. But I was, and this is a personal treat, I will block my time between 5:36 until the kids go to bed. That is I will not take a call unless you're the CEO. Fine, I'll make an exception, but I will not take recurring calls, because that's the time where I see my kids, eat with them, and where I bring them to bed. And I can tell you, my wife is very vocal on this, and I am still doing it right now. And rightfully so. I'm a father for a reason, right? I'm not a father from not seeing them.
Absolutely. So that same level of discipline on the personal side as it is on the professional side. Yeah. Now, looking forward, at least, I mean, when I'm looking at the management landscape, as we were discussing digital transformation, there was this huge movement of sustainability. And then now there's this huge movement of artificial intelligence, agentic AI, etc. Are we talking about something that is so way past, so obsolete, or is this a prerequisite?
It remains, yeah, it's a fair question. And I probably sound like a broken record in different companies that I've worked in. And I started in digital transformation when Industry 4.0 got hot around 10 years ago, or whenever it was. And we're still talking about the same thing: master data, standardization. You need to have your data. You need to have your hygienic management around your data. You need to do the blood, sweat, and tears, cleaning up your back end to make the data available for whatever technology there is. May it be AI, may it be better transparency around sustainability. As I said, I sound like a broken record, but this is the same work that still needs to be done. And I do see the intrinsic link between operational excellence and digital, where you have to fix your processes while or before doing digital.
No, I mean, I fully agree with you. I mean, starting with sustainability, the first requirement is that you need to be able to measure it. You cannot just say, oh, my energy use has decreased by X% or my carbon footprint, unless you have the data. And as a result, that ability of measuring, that ability of being able to actually synthesize and report over time is actually a big requirement. And
Yeah,
same thing for machine learning, same thing for other forms of AI.
yeah, yeah.
Unless you have the data, you cannot train these models. And if your training is
Or
incomplete,
even worse, if you don't do your homework, you're going to train the data with wrong data.
that's very true.
The algorithm with the wrong data. It's even worse. So again, blood, sweat, and tears, and unfortunately, it's still a lot of hard work.
That is absolutely, I guess, the base, the fundamental doesn't change. You have to sweat it to be able to harvest it
Yeah,
later on, I guess.
there's no easy way out,
That's
unfortunately.
that's really
If
great.
somebody knows it, call me. But no.
That's let's see here. I'm trying to see the questions that we can actually get here. One question, in fact, back into this, the connection with AI. Uh, Given the current technology, especially generative AI, would you have, I mean, if this was available to you at the time, would you have done things differently? Would it facilitate things? Would it actually complicate things?
It's a really good question. It would complicate things. I mean, where my head is, I overall I wouldn't change a thing, because still you need to make data available. You still need to think about what's my data source. How do I aggregate my data from my different data sources? May it be your ERP system, your MES system, your sustainability system, all the different data sources that you have. You still have to curate it to create
Hmm.
this layer, your data lake, your data platform, whatever you want to call it. You still have to do that hard work. And I think for any agentic development you want to do, you're still tapping in that data. The problem is, and that's the part of complexity, you want to have your system complete by building it. So I think having patches coming available might even make this development more complex.
I see. I see. I
I
guess one.
assume. I assume. I'm not the expert here in agentic development yet, but that's an assumption here. I think it would be more complex.
True, but again, I mean, the agent AI, machine learning in general, requires so much data, and unless you have the infrastructure for healthy data, for accurate data, for relevant data, as you were saying earlier, that's going to send you to a totally wrong path, to a goose chase.
Mm.
That's
And
definitely.
that's and you bring up an interesting topic. I mean, going down to memory lane, and we had one of our end goals would have been, we want to have a complete prediction of end to end of our production. If you imagine all the different variables going into your production process, each variable has obviously a certain sigma, a certain deviation in this
Hmm.
input. What if you could start modeling all those different variables in order to predict the outcome? Because then you can optimize your production. One of
Hmm.
the higher volume products that we had was so under control, we couldn't build the model because it was so well contained as a manufacturing process. There was not enough deviation to create a proper model. So it's quite interesting. You do need a lot of data and varied data to make something happen. But again, this is a specific example that I came up with in one of these innovation topics that we've done.
I see. And in fact, one of our participants, Joost, is saying that, look, maybe there are areas where AI can help. For instance, in cleaning up the data, in improving data quality, in eliminating, I guess, misclassifications, eliminating some of the, noise in the data kind of a thing, which is actually a good point to keep in mind. Let me ask a higher level question here. One question says, look, the board vision and the reality on the shop floor might actually be different. How did you navigate this gap to keep the teams motivated and engaged to deliver the transformation?
Well, that's a very good question, and indeed, this is having the people using it speak up, right? In the end, go and see Gemba. That's in the end getting the leadership to the shop floor, having them present the work, having them present the benefits to their job, and obviously that takes a few iterations at the beginning to get there. But I think that's part of closing the gap. And the other part of closing the gap, again, go and see. They would only believe it once they see it. So and I come back to having a few use cases deployed instead of doing more system deployments, rather use case deployment. I think that would have been really the biggest thing I would have changed.
I see. Here's an interesting question. Have you seen cases where a technically successful digital initiative still failed from a business perspective?
A technical, it depends what the criteria for failure are. I mean, it could still be that it's digitally possible, which could be a digital success, but the business case doesn't materialize. So yeah, is that a failure or a success? Well, I mean, this is part of innovation, right? You have to learn to do so. So it depends a little bit on what the question behind the question actually is.
Oh, I see. No, I mean, I guess, the say you have a spick and span, I don't know, a dashboard, but at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't deliver the capacity utilization that
Okay.
it had promised.
Yeah, but I think then you come back to the magic of a dashboard. The dashboard won't switch off your lights. The dashboard won't switch off that compressor. So if people are not using the dashboard, it will still fail. And again, this is the follow-up. This is part of the change that takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on the change part, where you actually have manual work to do to realize the action.
I see. Here's the flip side of that question. Let me read it for you. Which use cases deliver the fastest visible value, and which ones created the most long-term competitive advantage? Were you able to classify those, or were you able to notice those?
The long term I can disclose. The short term was obviously where the pool was the highest, and I think sustainability comes here to mind. The one that was I still love that technology, and I have no stocks in them. Sensor fact, it was a plug and play sensor. I think it was €10 a sensor for rent, maybe $200 to buy. And it made use of the magnetic field of a cable. So you could retrofit very easily an energy sensor, basically. Instead of stopping the sides, retrofitting all sorts of inline measurements, you could actually clamp on the sensor and capture an energy signal. Well, that was already step one. So pretty quickly, we could deploy energy sensors across the world in a relatively standard way. So that was step one. Step two is we got insight in energy usage. Two, we could start comparing certain batches. Why is producing a site in Shanghai so much more energy efficient compared to that site in Europe? What is wrong? And then you come into continuous improvement, using data to do improvements. And then I think the case that I love the most around sustainability, think about transparency. Once you are measuring the energy of each of your piece of equipment, you understand and you link it to your utilities, or in our case, it was heating of the adhesive, so that there was a heating element. We could calculate the carbon footprint of a single bottle of Loctite, which obviously in the realm of sustainability and transparency, I think that was a fantastic case. I really like it. But is there monetary value? No, it's digital. Well, there could be a market pool, but I think that the quickest one was indeed those easily scalable data sensors, capturing the data and then creating insight.
But again, this, for example, I mean, this is a very nice example for the longer term in the sense that right now, I mean, there's, we're talking about carbon pricing. In a lot of the cases, it's voluntary, but there will be a time where this is not going to be voluntary anymore.
It's going
so
to
you
be
have to pay
you
for
know
this.
it's going to happen. Yeah.
So as a result, you'll be ready. So this would be pretty much like an insurance to give you the ability to, I guess, your license to continue the operations rather than, oh
Yeah,
my God, I have to go back and retool kind
yeah.
of.
And what I think was really was nice on Henkel, its vision and its strategy was this front runner around sustainability. So I again, and then you see this pool for certain use cases too.
I see. That's very nice. So this last question actually was addressed to me, but given the fact that I'm running this show, I'm gonna immediately send it over to you. So how do you expect AI and agents to change the change management requirement of any transformation program? In other words, would this actually help you do this, accelerate stuff, or
I hope so. I hope there will be, or there is, AI or agents that can help me do master data cleanup, that can help me around the standardization of the backbone. In principle, there will be a lot of similar discussions around the change management of this backbone. So I do see the same hype again, high expectation, and at the end of the curve, it's still that blood, sweat, and tears. So I
yeah.
hope. I haven't seen it yet, honestly, but I do hope so.
My 2 cents worth on it is that, before we started the session, we were talking about, digital twins. I think one of the promise of digital twins, I mean, one of the big challenge of a digital twin, of course, is the construction of one. Currently, it's as expensive as the real system, but I think with agentic AI, being able to build these things is becoming much easier, much cheaper. And the nice thing about the digital twin connected with an agentic AI is that you can actually run several what-if scenarios or counterfactuals to try to indeed simulate the potential impact of different initiatives. So I think to show things without having to physically implement and wait for it to mature, that might be one big thing where I'm hanging my hat right now, at least on the academic or research side, but the jury is still out on that one. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to stop here. Nick, thank you very much for coming back and spending the time with us while you are again on the road. Thank you very much
Thank you,
for the
Enver.
opportunity to go through this case. It's always very nice to work with you, and best of luck to you with your operational excellence journey again. And we'll continue our discussion. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a wonderful workshop, and thank you very much for all those very relevant, very inquisitive questions. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us. Thanks,
A
Nick.
pleasure, Enver. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.